We're just blowing up the balloon.
There's lots of things, we just got a friend of ours who's in electronics.
Oh, yeah?
I'll tell you about this chap, who's called Alex. And he's great, he's a Greek fella. And he's invented incredible things, you see. So, that'll be big.
For many, 1968 marked the beginning of the end for the Beatles. The group at this point had begun to turn sour. The year would see Paul's relationship with Jane Asher come to an end, John's mood reach an all-time low, and the group form a disastrous record label. This is the story of the Beatles through 1968. The year begins with the Magical Mystery Tour broadcast on BBC Two in colour. A few days later, photographs taken by Richard Avedon back in August of 1967 are published in Look magazine. Originally in black and white, the photographs are transformed into psychedelic images. These images are later used for the Beatles' #1 album, released in 2000. January 25th, the Beatles filmed their short appearance in the film Yellow Submarine. They've been told they have to feature at the end of the film and appear for less than 15 seconds, introducing the song All Together Now. Knowing their trip to India is fast approaching, the group plan a single to be released in their absence. In February, recording sessions begin for the single Across the Universe. John's unhappy with the recording and the song is shelved. Instead, they decide to use Paul's song Lady Madonna. A photo shoot for the song takes place on February 8th. 3 days later, the Beatles appear at Abbey Road to shoot a music video for Lady Madonna. While there, they decide they don't like the song and they'll continue with John's half-written song Hey Bullfrog for their next release. They finish writing the rest of the song right there in the studio. The video they're shooting for Lady Madonna, they changed to suit Hey Bullfrog. While laying down some tracks for the song, Paul begins barking like a dog to amuse John. The song title is changed to Hey Bulldog. They later decide to release Lady Madonna instead. On the 15th of February, the group travel to Rishikesh, India to begin a meditation course. The course will last until April 25th. While in India, Paul and John begin composing songs. Paul has visions the songs could feature on their next album. The idea annoys George, who believes the group should be focusing on meditation, not songwriting. February 25th, George turns 25 and a birthday party is arranged, which includes chanting and fireworks. The Maharishi presents George with an upside-down plastic globe of the world before stating, "George, the globe I'm giving you symbolises the world today. I hope you will help us in the task of putting it right." George turns the globe over and declares, "I've done it." March 1st, Ringo and his wife Maureen leave Rishikesh. Ringo later states the spicy Indian food proved too much for him, but at the time he publicly praises transcendental meditation. March 15th, Magic Alex Mardas arrives in Rishikesh. While at the ashram, he soon becomes annoyed with the Maharishi's strict rules and begins sneaking in alcohol. 2 weeks later, Paul leaves the ashram. The novelty has worn off on him and he's more interested in Beatles-related business matters. April begins with only 2 Beatles remaining at the ashram. Magic Alex begins watching the Maharishi like a hawk. He questions John about the holy man's suspicious practices. April 12th, John and George leave the ashram after accusations of sexual misconduct towards the Maharishi. Back in England, work on their next album begins. The album has a working title of Doll's House, and artist John Byron designs them a front cover. This was the original cover for Doll's House. Both the album title and the cover would be scrapped. The picture was later used for a compilation album in 1980. At this time, friends and colleagues report John's mood has hit an all-time low. The catalyst is a combination of the failure of his marriage, the failure of the Apple boutique, his losing control of the Beatles to Paul, and of course, the episode with the Maharishi. George later stated, John was in a rage because God had forsaken him. In May, John and Paul appear on The Tonight Show to promote their new Apple company. The original tape does not exist. All that remains is this grainy 4 minutes of footage that's been shown now. The pair appear intoxicated, especially Paul. In fact, this is probably the most high he's ever appeared on a television interview. John and Paul speak in low tone, answering inane questions, with Paul giggling, slurring at times, and looking heavy-eyed. In fact, his appearance is eerily similar to the interviews Pete Doherty gave in the height of his fame. May 14th, John and Paul continue their Apple promotion, holding a press conference in New York. The event is a tedious affair, with the only interesting point coming when they address questions about the Maharishi. Side note, Paul at this time is beginning to have serious second thoughts about his relationship with Jane Asher. After this, the Beatles return to the studio and continue recordings for the White Album. May 22nd, Cynthia Lennon returns home to find John and Yoko sat together in their home wearing purple matching dressing gowns. Cynthia swears at John before darting out of the room. Later that day, John and Yoko attend an Apple launch party and John introduces her to everyone as his date. As June begins, sessions are suspended as George and Paul have other projects to tend to. George is filming in Hollywood with Ravi Shankar and Paul is to attend his brother's wedding as best man. At this time, John moves out of Kenwood to live with Yoko. With nowhere else to go, Paul offers John and Yoko a place at his St. John's Wood home. The two move in and make themselves at home. Paul hopes the new living situation will have a therapeutic effect on them. June 15th, Paul drives to his brother's wedding in North Wales in his Aston Martin with Jane Asher and his dog Martha in tow. Oddly, the newspapers printed show Paul kissing his brother's bride. After the ceremony, the reception was held at Paul's father's house with champagne and fireworks. Side note, Martha didn't like the crowds at the wedding reception and had to be taken home. 3 days later, Paul celebrates his 26th birthday. He spends it in the Apple offices with no other Beatles in attendance. In the next week, living at Paul's house, John and Yoko spend their time slumped on the couch, watching TV or staring vacantly into each other's eyes. At this point, the two have begun using heroin. Their strange activities make Paul uncomfortable. Paul drives over to Kenwood one day to see Cynthia and John's son Julian. On the journey, thinking about John's impending divorce, he begins thinking of things to say to Julian to reassure him. The words, "Hey Jules, don't take it bad, take a sad song and make it better," come into his head. On his return home, he has the early makings of Hey Jude and plays it on the piano for John and Yoko. The two, both high, are not that impressed. John will later describe the song as one of Paul's masterpieces. In the following weeks, John and Yoko, feeling unwanted, move from Paul's house into a flat. At this point, word has circulated John's marriage is over. Press reporters quiz John when he's seen with Yoko. They ask, "Who is this? Where's your wife?" John angrily responds, "I don't know." The month ends with the Beatles acquiring a 5-storey building at Savile Row, London for the price of £500,000. It will become the Beatles' new Apple headquarters. The building was what became of the original plan to buy an island and all live in domes. All 4 Beatles will own the building for many years, long after they've broken up. It will finally be sold in 1976. The group returned to the studio to begin work on John's song Revolution, which he wrote in Rishikesh. Paul doesn't think much of the song. He later states, John doesn't really get off the fence in it. John struggles with the song, rewriting lyrics right up until the recording. Everyone is shocked when John brings Yoko into the studio. He introduces her to everyone in the offices, and thereon, Yoko is at John's side for every session. Wary of John's explosive temper, nothing is said. On July 3rd, the Beatles, minus John, attend a screening for the Yellow Submarine film. An interviewer asks the three if the failure of the Magical Mystery Tour put them off making films themselves. George answers, "Yeah, we're only ever going to be cartoons forever now, because that really put us off." When asked about their current involvement with the Maharishi, Paul states, "We're over that phase." Around this time, Jane Asher returns home unexpectedly to find Paul in bed with American scriptwriter Francie Schwartz. According to a fan who always loitered outside of Paul's home hoping to catch a glimpse of any Beatle, Jane came storming out of the house and drove away. And a few hours later, Jane's mom arrived to collect her things. June 14th, Paul confronts John and the two have a blazing row in the halls of EMI. Paul accuses John of being childish, reckless and sabotaging the group. John doesn't take anything in and nothing is achieved. June 17th, the world premiere of Yellow Submarine takes place at the London Pavilion on Piccadilly Circus. Police hold back crowds of fans as the Beatles enter the theatre. Also in attendance are some of the Rolling Stones and Cream drummer Ginger Baker. At this time, Magic Alex begins work on Apple Basement Studios. June 18th, John appears publicly arm in arm with Yoko for the premiere of In His Own Right. Pictures are snapped of the two, and his wife Cynthia later states, "I knew when I saw the picture that was it." 3 days later, Jane Asher appears on the television show D-Time and announces her separation from Paul. She states, "I know it sounds corny, but we're still very close friends. We really are. We see each other and we love each other, but it hasn't worked out. That's all there is to it. Perhaps we'll be childhood sweethearts and meet and get married again when we're about 70. Paul is at home with his dad and Francie watching the broadcast. The announcement shocks him. It is also worth pointing out how both John and Paul's only long-term relationships ended with their partner returning home to them with another woman and only 2 months apart. 8 days later, the group posed for a photo shoot with the war photographer Don McCullen. The images are used as publicity shots. The event is later known as the Mad Day Out. A few days later, the group rehearse at George's home. John's irritable mood heightened by heroin use, he gets agitated and smashes a tape recorder. John is so irate, even Paul isn't able to calm him down. At this point, John's songs are becoming stranger and incomplete. The month ends with their Apple boutique shop closing down. The stock inside is given away for free. Paul issues a statement saying they chose to close down the shop, not because it wasn't making money, but because retail wasn't really their thing and they'd like to devote all their time to recording music and making films. August 8th, Paul and his new girlfriend are walking past the closed down Apple boutique and decide to paint Hey Jude on the windows to promote their upcoming single. The words are misconstrued as anti-Semitic remarks, mistaking the word Jude for Jew, and Paul receives complaints from the Jewish community. That day, the window is also smashed. Later that night, Paul is out at a club with Mick Jagger, who is also in attendance. Mick gives the DJ a copy of Beggar's Banquet to play to the excitement of the audience. Afterwards, Paul hands the DJ a copy of the Beatles single Hey Jude, which has never been heard before. The crowd go ballistic after hearing it and demand it be played on repeat for the rest of the night. August 11th, the group launched their record label Apple Records, and overnight they're swarmed with phone calls and kids wandering into Apple demanding auditions. George finds the whole event chaotic. He later states, "There were rooms full of lunatics throwing I-Ching and all kind of hangers-on trying to get a gig." It's reported around this time, John's non-stop drug taking has left him cranky and spaced out. When he visits the Apple offices, he snaps at the young, inexperienced staff. At this time, he's also hired a fortune teller named Caleb, who advises him on business matters during readings. The month of August ends with Paul attending Neil Aspinall's wedding. September begins with Paul phoning photographer Linda Eastman and suggesting she come to England and take pictures of the group. They begin a relationship soon afterwards. Through September, the cover of their next album is designed. It's completely white with their name and an engraved serial number that will end at 5 million copies. John, Paul, George and Ringo will have the first 4, so it will start at number 5. Simply titled The Beatles, the album quickly becomes known as the White Album. The month of September ends with the group announcing their next record will be a double album. The press announced the album will contain 27 tracks and will be released in November. As October begins, Paul drops hints at the group making a live TV appearance. The whole project is shrouded in mystery. Midway through the month, recording for the White Album is complete. 18th of October, John is raided by the drug squad and he's charged with possession of marijuana. A few days later, the Beatles' accountant Stephen Maltz sends them a letter saying Apple is a mess along with their personal finances. He accuses them of showing poor business practice and then resigns. A few days later, Paul visits the Cavern Club in Liverpool and is photographed by Linda. After this, the group cancel a TV advert for the White Album, complaining it's too expensive. November 1st, Linda moves into Paul's St John's Wood home. 5 days later, the pair travel to Hyde Park in Scotland to visit Paul's dilapidated home. Seeing the state of the place, Linda declares, "We'll do this place up." With Linda at the helm, renovations soon take place. While at the farm, Paul writes the song Her Majesty. November 8th, John and Cynthia's divorce is finalised. 3 days later, John and Yoko's first album, Two Virgins, is released. The album cover features the pair naked, and the other 3 Beatles are annoyed with the repercussions they will no doubtedly face. As for the music, Peter Brown later states, Paul and Ringo hated every note on the album. November 21st, Yoko suffers a miscarriage at Queen Charlotte's Hospital, London. John stays with her at the hospital in a spare bed. When no beds are available, John sleeps on the floor beside her. 1 day later, the White Album is released. December 4th, George sends a memo to Apple informing the staff 12 Hells Angels will be visiting Apple within the week. He reassures them not to fear the Angels, but does advise them not to let them take over Savile Row. A few days later, John and Cynthia's Kenwood house is put up for sale. The year ends in a melancholy mood for the group. The Beatles' future together is now hanging by a thread. 1969 would see a desperate attempt by Paul to keep the group together and their imminent demise.